If you look at it objectively, the modern celebration of Easter presents a bizarre contrast. On one hand, you have a solemn theological narrative about a crucifixion and a miraculous resurrection. On the other, you have families hiding brightly painted eggs in the bushes. To find the link between these two traditions, we have to look to festivals like Nowruz. Celebrated across regions like Azerbaijan, Nowruz is the Persian New Year. It acts as a living cultural fossil that helps explain this overlap. During the festivities, street performers stage a physical battle between the seasons. Two characters, one representing winter and the other spring, fight for dominance. Their primary weapons for this ritual are colored eggs. They smash them together, and a broken egg signals defeat. Spring, as the tradition dictates, always wins. These traditions are more than random holiday decorations. They are surviving fragments of humanity's oldest rituals, physical tools designed to ensure that the earth would actually wake up from the dead of winter. For the early agrarian empires of Mesopotamia and Persia, the spring equinox was the literal deadline for civilizational survival. Their food supply depended on tracking the seasonal shift with precision to ensure a successful harvest. Living through a long winter with dwindling grain reserves creates a specific kind of psychological pressure. Ancient people required tactile, physical symbols to manage this anxiety, rituals that made the return of the sun feel certain. At the center of these practices was fire. In Zoroastrian traditions and festivals like Nowruz, sacred flames were kept burning in central temples. Fire provided warmth and survival, but it also functioned as a symbol of purification, an earthly proxy for the sun used to burn away the stagnation of the cold months. Then there is the egg. Primitive cultures watched a living creature emerge from a hard, seemingly lifeless shell. That observation turned the egg into a universal symbol for the transition from death to life. They would dye these eggs specific colors to mimic the returning natural world: yellow for the sun, green for the trees, and blue for the sky. It was an act of sympathetic magic meant to coax the landscape back into production. Through fire and eggs, ancient societies built a globally recognized calendar rooted in the empirical facts of the environment. By the 4th century, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. This meant the church suddenly inherited millions of pagans whose lives and identities were anchored to the cycles of the earth. It was impossible to force an agrarian society to abandon rituals celebrating their literal physical survival. Attempting to eradicate these equinox fires or fertility symbols would result in cultural alienation and rebellion. The solution was the absorb to transform playbook, famously advocated by Pope Gregory the Great. Keep the outward rituals, but systematically overwrite their internal religious meaning. The Council of Nicaea standardized the date of Easter to unify disparate celebrations. They adopted a formula permanently tying the holiday to the stars. Easter falls on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the vernal equinox. This synchronization anchored the theology of Christ's resurrection to the exact astronomical moment when the earth physically triumphs over winter. Once the calendar was synchronized, the church moved to step 2, physically baptizing the material symbols of spring that the public refused to abandon. Across Europe, ancient pagan bonfires ignited to dispel the winter were absorbed into the Easter liturgy. These fires were recast as symbols of Christ's victory over the darkness of death, keeping the community celebration intact while changing its focus. The pagan worship of the returning sun was translated into the light of Christ, manifested in the Paschal candle. Marked with the current year and the symbols of beginning and end, this candle functioned as a physical pillar of fire guiding the congregation. This synthesis remains most visible at the Holy Fire ceremony in Jerusalem. Thousands of worshippers gather at the tomb of Jesus to light candles from a central flame, an annual rite recorded since the 4th century. The church applied the same logic to the egg. Early Christians in Mesopotamia adopted the practice of egg decoration, but dyed the shells deep red. The red symbolized the blood of Christ, and the hard shell represented the sealed stone tomb. Cracking the egg now signaled the resurrection, turning a fertility symbol into a liturgical tool. By hollowing out these objects and filling them with Christian narrative, the church executed a cultural takeover, leaving the people's comforting physical rituals in place. The church's success relied on a specific observation. While theological concepts are abstract, human rituals are physical. To survive the fall of empires, a belief system must align with the somatic habits of the people. As this visualization shows, the Church mapped its theological claim, the defeat of death, directly onto the most undeniable empirical truth of nature. This messaging is durable because it relies on environmental certainty. No matter how bitter the winter, the spring physically returns. This ancient syncretism is still visible today. A table prepared for Nowruz, filled with sweets and sprouted wheat, shares the exact seasonal DNA as the Christian Easter table. The agrarian rituals of the vernal equinox survive globally, flourishing under the banner of the cross. By refusing to destroy these traditions, the Church ensured they would endure as long as the seasons themselves.